Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. I'm here to share with you tips and tricks on cutting fabric on the Cricut machine. While I will focus on the Cricut Maker, since that is the machine I have, I will let you know what you need to cut fabric on other Cricut machines. So let's dive in. All right, you're going to need a few supplies. The first one is a fabric grip mat, or you can use the strong grip mat, but I use the fabric one and it works well for me, so I can't speak to the other mats. Now you can see I've already used this mat, and you don't want to use this mat with other paper materials because fuzz will stick to this and change its tacky quality. Now the other thing you're going to need is the cutting blade. The Cricut Maker comes with this rotary cutting blade, and I do like using this blade the best. However, it can't cut as fine of detail as the other available blade, which is called the bonded fabric blade. Now, if you don't have a Cricut Maker, that is the blade that you are going to want to use on your Explore machines. Now go ahead and follow instructions for your machine to install the blade. And before you can get to cutting, you need to make sure your mat is clean. Now, if you're brand new to cutting, you won't have to do this step, but after you've been cutting for a little while, lint will build up on your mat. The best way to clean it off is with a wet wipe. Here I am using a disposable wet wipe, but you can use a wetted fabric wipe as well. What you don't want to do is try and scrape that lint off, because most likely you'll just end up scraping the stickiness off and it won't work on the lint very much anyway. So let it dry once you've wiped it down, and then you're ready to go ahead and attach your fabric. So let's talk about different fabrics you can cut. Now this is a woven cotton fabric, which has some disadvantages that it will fray, but we'll talk about non-fraying fabrics as well as what to do about using fabrics that will fray. And these two pieces are both cotton woven fabrics. I have ironed on a bonding material to the back of these, and that is available at sewing stores and a lot of craft stores. And you can just lay it down flat on your fabric, iron it on, and then you're good to go to cut your fabric, and you won't have any problems with your final pieces fraying and falling apart. Now we will talk about a trick on using these fabrics without that step, and we'll get to that in a minute. Here I've got a piece of satiny kind of material that will fray, so I have put that bonding on the back of it. And the best fabrics that don't fray are craft felt, which has a little bit of a disadvantage, which we will touch on. And my favorite is polar fleece. Polar fleece is a little more expensive, but it is a wonderful texture and it cuts beautifully on the Cricut Maker. So that is one that I do recommend a lot. The other one that I didn't show here is t-shirt material, which is also called stretch knit. And you can repurpose old t-shirts that have holes in them or are wearing out for this, and you won't need to worry about those fraying because that fabric does not fray. All right, as I was mentioning those fabrics, I am prepping my mat here with a variety of materials so that you can see how each of these cuts on the Maker. All right, now if you don't have the Maker, you can use the other cutting blade. I do find that it's a little more finicky and you'll need a little more patience to work with it, but you can get good results. And in fact, because of the pointed shape of the bonded fabric blade, you can get some more detailed images. Here, I'm just gonna cut some really simple images, circles, triangles, squares, along those lines to show you the basics of cutting fabric. Speaking of cutting shapes, let's go ahead and move into our software, and I will show you how I set up these shapes. I just use, like I said, a triangle, rectangle, and circles to create arrows and circles with arrows embedded in them. So here is the creation of the arrow, where I just use a rectangle and a triangle and this very important feature down here that allows you to combine those shapes into one cutting shape. And that is under the little drop down, and then you want to choose the feature that says Unite. And then once you have a solid shape, You can size it up or down however you need it, or you can do what I'm doing, which is to attach it to another shape. So I'm going to overlay those shapes however I think they look good, using the alignment features in the Cricut if I want to, and then select them both and use that attach feature down there in the corner. Now your shapes will combine colors so that they look like one united shape. However, that arrow shape is still a separate shape from the circle. All right, with our shapes ready to go, we can send it off to the Cricut for cutting. I have some saved materials here that I use on a regular basis. There's a whole way that you can do this. If you don't know, I will try and link you up to a video. And I'm just going to use a basic felt cutting setting. Now there are two different settings, one for bonded and one for regular. I'm just going to use the regular felt setting. I do like to increase my pressure when we get to this stage of the cutting screen, and it tells you to make sure that if you're using the Maker, that your rotary blade is installed. And if you're on an Explorer, it'll probably ask you to install your fabric cutting blade. After all that is set, you just send it to your Maker like you would any other cut. And here I've got a little bit of a live action view and the sound of the Maker as it finishes up my cuts. And you can see my little fabric did kind of tip up there. So you do want to make sure your mat is nice and sticky so that these pieces don't come loose. All right, let's take it off the mat, and you can see that for the most part it cut pretty well, but you might find with fabric that some of the fibers didn't cut all the way through, and you might have little pieces that are hanging off or little pieces that are still slightly attached. A pair of scissors will just help you finish up that. Here is what that polar fleece looks like. It cuts beautifully, and I can't recommend that fabric enough. Now here is the craft felt. Craft felt tends to have this cobwebbiness to it after cutting that you will have to nip and trim. Felt that has a wool content, especially higher wool contents, will cut more cleanly than a typical acrylic craft felt. But since I don't pay for that, I just deal with the imperfection of using inexpensive craft felt. And that just means cleaning it up a little bit more. All right, and as you can see, my woven fabrics cut nicely. Let's go ahead and take a look at how small of cuts we can get on this Cricut. You can see already that I've sized down some of my arrows. Now I'm cutting some circles out of, circles with the arrows embedded in it out of the craft felt, and you can see I have that cobwebbiness happening, and I'm okay with just finishing up those little cuts because really it's just nipping off those fibers and not having to really do the shape. And you can see how tiny I'm getting. Now using some of this satin fabric, I'm getting even tinier. So when I talk about detail not cutting well, I usually mean lots of changes in shape. Or direction that the cutting blade needs to go. So basic, simple, straight, or basic, simple, curved lines are fine. The more curves or changes of direction that you get mashed up together, the harder it will be to cut. All right, here I have just a plain piece of woven cotton that I did not put any bonding to the back of. Now, this is going to be a lot of people's situation where you have fabric to cut, but you don't want to go out and buy anything extra. So what do? I just use glue, just plain old white glue. I put very small dabs of the glue on the very edge of the fabric and then just kind of smush it down with my finger and let it dry. And here it is. Once it's dry, you can kind of see the foggy shape left behind of that glue on my little plastic scratch piece there, so I didn't get gluey on my table. And you can see as I rub along the edge of the fabric, it is not really pulling fibers loose from that shape. And if I have this fabric here that I run that's not been treated with glue, you can see how loose those fibers will come. And if you have a small tiny shape and you're losing some fibers, you're going to totally lose your shape. So glue can help solve that problem. Now it might not be perfect. You might get a little piece here and there. You can either add some more glue or just work with it carefully so that doesn't happen. Here I am taking some of my leftover fabric that I have already cut shapes out of, and I'm going to trim them down by hand and turn them into new shapes so that I can continue using them with my projects. And finally, coming to this screen, I took a lot of white fabric for this cutting project. And then I have another video where I use alcohol inks to colorize white fabric. So I like to work with white materials whenever possible, and then I can color them however I want. That way I don't have stacks and stacks of various colors of material sitting around. I just need the one stack of white. At any rate, I hope you found this video useful to get some tips and tricks to cut fabric. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, please do drop me a note. I will answer your questions as soon as I can. So that is it for this time around. I will see you next time. And until then, I hope you have an artful day.